Most people know me in the chat. Long story short, my name is Professor Black Ops. I've been in IT for 30 plus years. I've been in cybersecurity for 15. My two big feats, I work for DoD doing programming and security and really federal compliance for, once again, 10 years. And I work for the state of Indiana as consultant, Department of Revenue doing IRS. And I did risk assessment for any software coming into the agency. Right there, you see NIST 800-53. Any software that's touching your network, you have to do a risk assessment per the IRS. So once again, if y'all got any questions, chats, or statements, just put them in the chat box. We can always pivot. So I'm about to get started. Once again, I want to welcome everybody to the chat and what's up. You know, there's some familiar faces. R squared, 8-bit in the house, Cam, Regine. Once again, R squared, AB, that's Cole. So once again, thanks for joining me. You know how we do it. Just put in your questions in the chat. We're about to get started. So everybody know I do this. So really, the RA family's in there, if I can find it. I went for a walk. It was 90 degrees. There it is, risk assessment. So really, that's the family we're going to really focus on tonight. And actually, we're really just going to touch on it. There's a lot of pre-stuff before you start digging into federal compliance. Also in there, part of that is assessment, CAs in there, system service and acquisition. Once again, before you acquire any service or systems, you got to do a risk assessment on it. So those kind of the three big families that kind of roll into, once again, SR2 with the supply chain. Really, those families kind of roll in with the risk assessment. Once again, there's some of the subfamilies: security categorization, risk assessment, vulnerability and monitoring, technical surveillance, risk response. Privacy is real big coming. That's part of risk assessment. And we're going to talk about what departments does what. When I worked for a big company, we actually had a separate team that did privacy, GDPR, CCPA. So that's really wasn't part of GRC. But once again, we're going to talk about the different departments and how they feed into your risk assessment. A lot of times when you work for a small company, you're going to do all those departments rolled into one. So we're going to talk about them breaking them up. In a smaller company, you kind of doing it all. So once again, third-party types of risks vendors may be introduced. Outside relationships are risky. Contractual relationships. Third-party relationships can introduce various types of risk, including cybersecurity risk. I think that's the one we think about in our industry, really what we focus on. I think we silo a lot into that. Once I got in a little more senior leadership, then I was hanging out with the financial department and legal. They really focus on operational risk. Cybersecurity really flows up into operational risk because the operations usually running on computers, moving data around. So if the computer system's not working right, that really rolls up to operational risk. Then the part two from a GRC, compliance. You see HIPAA violations. Most people know I do FedRAMP, NIST 800-53, CMMC, SOC 2 is part of that, right? But once again, if you fail in compliance, that's really operational risk, right? If we're supposed to do HIPAA and we fail at it and we get fined, that once again rolls back up into the operation. And a lot of times, shout out to Chris and B-Dubs, they talk about enterprise risk. Enterprise risk really rolls up into operational risk, right? Cybersecurity is kind of a silo. Compliance is kind of silo, and they roll up into operational risk. Let's see. Let me see if there's any questions in there as I ramble. Let's keep rolling. I got too many screens in the background. We're going to get to it. The other part of that, too, is financial risk. Usually when you talk about enterprise risk, it's usually ran by the CFO a lot of times when I'm in those meetings. Then strategic risk and reputational risk. I think IT cybersecurity really drilling down to reputational risk. If you get hacked or, Kaseas and all your data spewed all over the internet, right? A lot of people think their reputation is going to be damaged. You see it right there, reputational risk. Data breaches caused by weak third-party security can exponentially affect organizational reputation, impact customers' perception of your company, and even if your organization didn't cause the breach, right? So if a third party cause you a breach, a lot of times they just remember the company they gave their data to. And a lot of times reputational risk is cool, but There's so many companies that's been hacked now. I don't know how much reputational risk is in there. I just, once again, it's not uh, if you've been hacked, but when you're going to be hacked. So I don't know. I think that reputational risk is kind of, I want to say, almost dying down, which is sad, right? We just so used to getting hacked. Then once again, strategic risk and financial risk. The strategic risk, third-party relationship, termination or disruption will affect operations, which can halt process towards organizational goal. And failure to meet internal objectives can impact your strategies, which put projects completion at risk. Right. So those are kind of the main risk categories that third-party risk is going to feed into. I think a lot of times, once again, I was that way. When you talk about cybersecurity risk, you think at it from an IT perspective. But when you're at a large corporation, once again, that rolls up into your operational risk, your financial risk, and your strategic risk. Right. So, but going back to the other slide, operational risk, right? Because each one of your operations or business processes is part of the operation. Most of your business process again runs on IT solutions now, third-party solutions in the cloud. You running a service, an outside service. So that's kind of where that third-party risk can consist. And there was a lot of big-time hacks that were caused by third-party. And I think, especially in this R5, the supply chain got expanded and the risk assessment got expanded. Once again, they want to make sure you're validating your third parties that's bring you software and services. And a lot of those services, once again, are in the cloud. Once again, organizations are concerned about the risk associated with the products and service that may potentially contain malicious functionality or counterfeits or vulnerabilities due to poor manufacturing development practice within the supply chain. A lot of times when they talk about supply chain, a lot of times they talk about physical, where you're getting your PC ones, where you're getting your servers, where's your cloud vendors getting your services from. And coming up, I kind of got my 12 favorite things to look at in risk assessment, and making sure you're not getting counterfeit hardware and software is one of my favorite checks. We're gonna look at that coming up. These risks associated with enterprise, decreased visibility into understanding how the technology is acquired, developed, integrated, process and procedures. And I got a slide because sometimes your third party has third parties and their third parties has third parties. So how do you get visibility into that chain and how do you control that? We got a slide coming in and we're gonna once again dig into that a little more. And here's the slide. So the first level right there, acquiring enterprise, that's us with the big I. We got our suppliers and our externals. Then they have suppliers. Right there gets a little darker, right? So if I assess the supplier and external, and they got, do I get to assess them? Then if their suppliers got sub-suppliers, right, it's real dark, right? So how do you, once again, make sure you understand the connection linkage of your suppliers, right? A lot of times, we're going to talk about that coming up. For the big contracts that are over, once again, HIPAA and high trust, this supplier, if they have any suppliers, a lot of times they got to let us know, right? So that's how you get visibility in there. And we're going to dig in to see where that green line is. That's a fine line because if I put a lot of contractual requirements, right, I'm actually running their GRC process and procedures. If they get hacked, they could blame me, right? So we got to be careful how many requirements we give them without actually taking control over their organization. Long story short, I used to get in trouble with that at DOD. So that's why I'm real hesitant, right? So that's where we're going to talk about that. That's why you got to get your legal staff in there, right? You want to give them requirements, but you don't want to run their organization. If you run their organization and they get hacked, then you're responsible, right? So there's kind of a fine line in that. So, and we're going to definitely talk a little bit about that. Once again, I got about 10 or 11 slides. Mr. Whitlock said he had a few questions for me, so I want to make sure I be respectful of study GRC's time. But once again, that's real huge is visibility into your supplier. And there was one Log4j that happened that I got everybody hacked. So I was working at a client. We had suppliers. They were running software. We didn't know they had Log4j in their software because we didn't have visibility. It was actually running in our data center. When we scanned for it, it happened to come up and like, oh, now we got to patch it. So once again, you got to figure out what your suppliers are running. So if there's a hack on that particular software, you'll be able to know and understand it. Excuse me. Once again, throw any questions. So we're going to kind of dig down into that. Supplier security requirements, physical and cybersecurity process are evaluated during a supplier vetting. The vetting is the risk assessment, meaning a couple includes the process requirements and supplier agreements, contractual language, and we're definitely going to talk about that from a legal perspective because you can do questionnaires, security exhibits. If they're not in the supplier agreements, then they're not legally binding to do that. That's one thing I used to miss out on. Okay, I'm doing all this great security, but if it's not in our legal contractual requirements, they really don't have to do it. They do it one time, but then there's no legal obligation for them to keep doing that. Key process evaluated for suppliers and vetting include security governance, manufacturing operational security, software engineering, asset management, incident management, transportation of security, physical environment, personnel. Once again, I got my list of what I looked at, and that's part of the list. So these are things you check as part of your risk assessment. Like when I was doing work with the IRS, we would move paper files to our warehouse. My boss, who's ex-NSA, we're going to interview him, transport security, because if something happened to those tax returns, we would be held personally liable, and that would be a breach if somebody stole the car with the tax returns behind them. A lot of times we get so enamored with the tech and computer part, there's a lot of physical things we need to check depending on how your data is being moved. Let me see if there's any questions in there while we ramble. Once again, welcome. I appreciate that. Let's see. My man Chris got a question in the chat. I'm going to jump to it. What's the best practicing for extending personnel screening policy to third? I appreciate you. Policies to third-party contractors and their staff, especially those with privileged access. That's actually an excellent question. So a lot of times, especially in the federal space, you have to do a background check. And one thing is called OFAC, and inside OFAC, you got to have an employment background check, felony background check, and if you owe IRS, they check your credit, which I thought was weird. So those are the kind of checks you do. And if you're a privileged user, especially in the FedRAMP, when I was at DOD, I was actually on a production box, but I couldn't change anything. My boss, who I'm going to interview, he actually had a polygraph lie detector test. So depending on the level of data, you're a privileged user. Now, most private businesses, you just going to do a background check felony. But depending on the level of data, you can actually get there to a little higher than that. So let me keep going. I know Chris got a couple more questions. Like I said, I got a few more slides. This is an example of one. Companies have identified various practices. Focus on brand integrity rather than brand protection. Supports the life cycle threat model to identify, address vulnerabilities in supply chain. And one thing we always forgotten, one of my colleagues actually did something. We had a vendor, I really liked them. I passed a security check. She happened to go look at them. The company was in bankruptcy, right? So you need to check the financial health of a company, right? So we end up doing business with them, right? But you need to make sure if they're in good standings with the Better Business Bureau and make sure they're a viable, ongoing business, right? I was so enamored with the technology and the FIPS and the this and that. I forgot to check if the company was in good standing, meaning financially, right? So procurement and sourcing are developed jointly. And we're going to talk about that, the different teams, IT, security, engineering, operational personnel, and sourcing. So I got a slide talking about the four main departments risk assessment works and kind of who does what. But once again, that's for a larger company, a smaller company. We're going to roll all those up probably into one. RPs, standard security terms and conditions, and our request for RPs, which stands for request for proposal. If you work for the state or government, if they're going to do a service, hardware, software, they got to send it off to bid. That's RP. So the company's they answer your questions, right? Are you FIPS? Are you NIST? Right. So that's part of the RP vetting of the business before you let them bid on work. And the other way around, I work for companies that bid on federal work. So I used to get the RFPs, read through them, and make sure we can do what the RFPs are asking. And two, I got a slide coming up, and we're going to kind of break down what department does what. Assets or business owner must be formally accept responsibility exceptions for security guidelines. And that's part of my slide too, is anything you do from a security perspective that deviates from the enterprise, the business owner has to accept or reject it, right? It's not, people always think security has this thing that it can do unilaterally. That's incorrect. If it's going to make money, a lot of times they're going to do it without your formal approval of it, right? There's a lot of things I didn't want to do because I thought it was not as secure as it was. But if it's a $10 million, my job is to work with the security team to make it get secure, right? Do we need more money? Do we need some? What do we need to make this secure so we can do this business, right? So I think a lot of people think it's unilaterally yes or no from IT or security or GRC, and it's not that way. Since many risk assessments depends on suppliers' self-evaluation, number of companies employ on-site verification and validation. Some companies cross-train. Yeah, and that's yes or no. It is true that they do self-evaluation. Shout out to my man, Dave. He's not here. That's where your SOC 2s come in. That's where your SOC 2 Type 2 comes in. Your NIST or your CMC certification from a third party. They validate these things, so they're not doing self-evaluation. Now, I get a little nervous because the company pays these people to do these evaluations, right? So sometimes they have a little sway, but a lot of times that's where the SOC 2 Type 2 comes in because that's supposed to be a third-party organization doing that. So that kind of dissuades that. So here, let's see. There's some of the departments coming up we're going to talk about and kind of what they do or not do. Shout out to my man, Dave. I just mentioned him. So a lot of people I don't trust to do the SOC 2, but shout out to my man, Dave. I know he does excellent work. So if Dave sign off on their SOC 2 Type 2, then I'll take it, right? So a lot of times when you do a risk assessment, if they got a SOC 2 Type 2, right, that validates a lot of I call it low-hanging fruit. Let's see, I'm going back and picking up any questions. This is the best practice. What is the most common mistakes organizations make when sharing data with vendors? Not securing it. I see people email stuff in a regular email. I'm like, dude, you just email me your findings and what's wrong. So sharing data, not securing it, not giving it its proper level of data classification, which is their data. If they want to email it, I'm cool with it. I was working with a big company doing some IRS audits, and they sent it in regular email. I was shocked, right? Because there's a lot of secure emails. Shout out to if you run an Office 365, you can actually secure it, do a link. You're not sending an email, you just upload it to their website. So there's a lot of ways to see, but just not protecting their findings and stuff. We ask them because a lot of times you put in how to actually break into your company. What's your level of encryption? What's your subnetting? What databases you're using? What's your server? A lot of times you have version numbers in there, right? So I remember at the banner tickly rolls at the bottom. now this is PG, AP, PG. This PG, this PG. Let's see. I think we're rolling. So let's go. So when I work for big companies and we do RPs or risk assessment, these are the departments we work with. So say we're GRC, that's kind of what we live in. We're usually talking about GRC from a corporate level, right? So the company says we do encryption. It's got to be FIPS 140-3, right? We do breach notifications. We need to be notified in 72 hours or less, right? We do that from a corporate level, from a GRC perspective. But a lot of times if you're doing work or internal work, they might say to connect to this particular third-party AWS, it's got to be an API call. It needs to be SHA-256. That's not going to be in the corporate policies or procedures, right? So who would take that? That's going to either be the IT teams because they do specific things for calling different products that they developed inside their infrastructure. So if we do LexisNexis, that's common among companies. They check your credit is how are we connected with them? They might say do a SAML call. That's going to be nowhere in corporate procedures or policies, right? How that authentication is. So that actually would go to the IT teams. But GRC, a lot of times we quarterback it. We say, okay, this is in the RP or this is part of the risk assessment for us to get that type of data. How are you protecting that IT teams? Then they say, well, we're doing this and that. I'm not qualified to do that. That's going to be the security SOC team, right? Because now you delving into the specifics of how that service is going to be called. That's not going to be in GRC. That's going to be in the security and SOC. We see some protocols. Are they doing open source? Are they doing SAML or open ID? Are they doing data commingling and other tenants? Now I might ask that question. Encryption, how are you destroying your backups? Right? I might say, okay, you need to destroy your backups, but are you encrypting them and throwing away the key? Are you shredding physical backups, right? A lot of times that's going to be a security questionnaire by the security team. Then the privacy, shout out to Chris and Dwight. They talk about GDPR, CPA. GRC a lot of times don't handle that. That's either going to be legal or procurement when they start talking about GDPR. Because GDPR is such done at a legal term a lot of times. GRC usually don't touch the GDPR, CCPA, and the New York DFR, which is the New York version of CCPA. We really need a federal standard for privacy, but that's a different stream and a different. Then legal is MSA, Master Service Agreement, End User License Agreement, DPA. I put trust centers a scam. Everybody has trust centers. Shout out to our favorite person. She was developing a trust center, but I asked legal one time. I was like, well, if that trust center is not in our Master Service Agreement, can we tie those together? They're like, nah, they can change that anytime they want, right? So just because you're doing all these tests and these are security exhibits, if they're not any legal documentation saying that third party needs to do it, right, then you're just doing it for show. I wouldn't say you're doing it for show. The time you're doing it, point in time is good. But next year, if you don't have it legally required to do it, they don't have to do it, right? So I think that's a lot of things that I used to miss as part of that. So once again, you got compliance and GRC. That's usually done at a corporate level. This is what they sign on it. We're doing NIST, RS Pub 1075. But once again, the development teams could say, we can do it. We got mitigating controls, or we actually did something more secure. So depending on what type of risk assessment is, sometimes I can answer a lot of questions, but sometimes I got to shoot that to the development team to actually figure out how they're developing it. Let's go to shout out to me. Yeah. Yeah. But so those are the teams that you need to work with. Now, in a smaller company, a lot of times I might do compliance, and a lot of times I do security because I got that background, right? So I understand ports and protocols, firewalls, which I got coming up, which once again, the things I usually ask off the top. But once again, from a third-party assessment, to really have a complete assessment, you really need to be touching all these items. Right. If you're leaving any of these items out, you opening yourself up for maybe some issues. Now let's really wind back. Is a lot of times when you're doing a service, because you're just taking a default service, you're doing a click through. They're not gonna let you touch any of these items. AWS is not gonna let you touch any of these unless you spend $2 or $3 million. You're gonna go on their website. You're going to click and say, I accept, and you're going to get what you're going to get, right? So, but once you get to that next level, once again, talking about risk assessments, these are the things you want to touch. I really do need. Oh, yeah, shout out Miss Burgess. That's definitely it. I'm touching my toe in it. Shout out to my man, Dwight and Chris. The CIPP, that's probably fourth on my list. Shout out to B-Dub. She's still getting on me. I need to take that CISSP. PBO getting old, he's been tired. But once again, yeah, that privacy's really expanding. Now, when I look at RFPs and risk assessments, I see a lot of GDPR language, even in the United States, because they talk about processor. I'm like, that's a GDPR term, right? So, but I think we do need a national privacy law to kind of get that down. But once again, these are the different departments. Once again, when I work for the big companies, I can like quarterback, and then I reach out to each one of these departments and ask them questions. Then once again, our security department, they send out their security questionnaire. Then on the GRC side, we got a security exhibit that legal kind of built with us. Like you need to be, and that's coming up in the next slide. These are the usually things that were in our DPA or our security exhibit. Let me get back to the slides. So these are PBO. These are the things I kind of tap on when I first do a risk assessment just to get me started. Breach notification. Because really none of this comes up unless somebody get hacked or something happened, right? That's really when this stuff really comes up, right? If you get a breach, that's when everybody, oh, did they have policies and procedures? Did they have this? So first thing I want to know is breach notification. From people know I do federal work. The IRS, if you say something in 24 hours, you need to be known, right? I think FBI with the sieges, I think they're 72 hours, right? So depending on the federal agency and your classification of data, I usually do 72 hours or less. Anything longer than 72, I usually have to send that up to the CISO or the CIO or the business notification, right? Prohibited telecom, long story in a nutshell. Huawei, you're not getting anything from Iran or Iraq. Where are you getting your computer equipment from? The cool thing is AWS and Azure, they already have this covered. If you look inside their trust center, they validate where they get their source material. They're actually putting it on a database and tracking their individual components to make sure they know where they're getting, once again, their individual components. Firewall, at minimum, IDS or IPS. Logging, we want them to have some kind of SIM. Patching configuration, you need to be on Patch Tuesday. You need to make sure any critical or high-level patches you're handling. So how do you handle that process? Physical and logical separation with data and, logging in and badging in. All that's kind of included. Encryption, right at a high level, your corporation should be doing encryption. Now, should it be FIP? Should it be AES 256? Should it be DAS3? Now, what type of encryption? People know I do Fed, so 9 times out of 10, it's got to be AES 256, right? Security and awareness training. We want to make sure you're taking care of your staff. Policies and procedures, just standard. I always put that with management. Chris just asked, what kind of background investigations are you doing? Once again, OFAC is the government where they do drug tests, criminal, employment. Most time people are doing it. I tell you the weird thing I see a lot of times, people are actually taking the drug tests out, especially weed. So I guess marijuana is becoming a doable drug, which kind of throws me off a little bit because I'm old. But yeah, we're starting to see that pushback on that. And two, I like to see compliance certification. Shout out to my man Dave, he's in there. You got a SOC 2 Type 2 FedRAMP, State Ramp, FISMA, or a lot of times, if not, a GLPA, which is for banks. They have a statement in their right to audit. So if we don't feel like something is correct, we can fly out and have a right to audit your organization, right? So if I don't have any other certifications, I'm going to put, we have a right to audit at least every year, as long as we give you a 72-hour notice, right? I've actually seen it on one RP where they had a right to audit, and if they thought something was funny, you actually had to pay their hotel bill, which I thought was weird. I went to my boss. He goes, oh, no, we're not doing that. So those kind of stuff you look in there, I just never forgot that. I right to audit, and yeah, you're going to pick up our hotel bill. We was like, no, we're not. So, and two is who's your point of contact? CISO, a lot of companies, CIO and CISOs are one person, right? And if I'm doing anything in the cloud, I like to do just the big vendors, right? We're going to be elitist, right? We're going to go Azure, Oracle. I'm not a big Google fan. Once again, Oracle's in there. Probably the top 5 Rackspace, right? And a lot of our vendors are actually in Oracle and Azure, right? Half of their software runs into that. So those are kind of PBO's top 10. I think that's more than 10. So when I start doing a risk assessment, those are the things I kind of hit to start off. The cool thing is a lot of the big companies, all this really is on their website. So a lot of times you can just go search for breach notifications, search for their firewall, search for logging and monitoring, and they kind of have that kind of spelled out for you on their site. So let's see. See what my man AB said. Do you see any organizations building TPR frameworks that will scale enough to that. Oh yeah. Yeah, there's a few out there. Once again, since I do federal work, NIST is the framework, right? So I sent out, or the IRS, they tell you kind of part of their framework what they want you to do in there, right? And part of that framework is schisms or STIGs or CIS benchmark checks. So I send those checks out to say, if you're running this type of Windows servers, this is how you harden it, right? And these are the things that need to be fixed. So what's your score on your CIS level 1, CIS level 2, or CMMC? Yeah, there's quite a few frameworks. I've just been doing it so long. I just got to know what I'm looking for. And a lot of times too, for larger companies, the clients we deal with already have federal work, so they have federal compliances already. They're gonna have your SOC 2 type 2. They're gonna have your FedRAMP. So for me, it's kind of like I can kind of look at those findings, look at those documentation, look at those websites. Once again, encryption, FIPS 140-3 cost a lot of money. So I'm trying to see if they got those endpoints. Shredding for the IRS, it's almost dust. That's real expensive. So there's like, once again, 10 things, depending on what I'm reviewing, that I just kind of OJT. So like I said, I've just been doing this forever. Right to audit, but they don't apply to AWS. Oh, facts, Dave. But the cool thing is, and Dave makes a good point, you just can't roll up to AWS. AWS always had the big 3PLs that come already out and validated, right, Dave? So those, right, that, and I do have that in another slide. I guess I'll show it. But now Dave's right, and I'm going to bring up that other slide. I was going to skip it, but shout out to Dave. Shout out to PBO. Shout out to me. We're going to freelance it. And that's what Dave's talking about there. Shared responsibility matrix. And he's right. AWS says, we got the bottom player. You don't need to check on us. We good. The government done looked at us. We got 3 PLs out. We done had the Fed out. We good down here in the orange, right? You're responsible in blue up here. So, but Dave's correct. So, but that's the good thing is, and AWS don't want me and 1,000 other people checking their data center. So they had their 3 PLs out, or big time people like Dave B that knows how to do assessment. So once Dave B says AWS is good, they good. Shout out to him, right? So no, but once again, they had that reviewed. They know that's blessing. So you're responsible for blue. So even though they gave you computer system, how you're encrypted? Are you using a KMS key? Are you using a HMS key that's a hardware key that you control? Are you using the AWS keys? Just because they give you compute, you have to configure it in blue, right? So that's the part I'm assessing to make sure you configured it right. But David's 100%. You're just not going to roll up into AWS. But once again, shout out to AWS, Azure, and the big guys. They made their data center FedRAMP, FISMA, high trust. They got all the certification they need. So that cuts my job down exponentially, right? Because I know they have that particular piece taken care of, right? So, but no, Dave is 100% correct. Ms. Burge, are you incorporating questions from your PQRC standards yet? A few. A lot of times in the Fed space, once again, those are already answered once again by AWS. So we would just have to answer the vendor those particular questions. And once again, those are usually done by, once again, that sheet, that's usually done by the privacy team, not the GRC team, to be honest. Now, if you're a small team, and if you're a small company, we don't answer those questions, right? So a lot of times, too, it's a separate issue. The PCI, you're either going to have the certifications or not, right? So that's kind of, we handle that. PBL was like, shout out to you, Breezy. Y'all, shout out to my team, B-Dubs and Chris signed me up to lecture. So but once again, I'm going to jump back. Dave, you want to come up and chat it up? Because I know you do this in real life, but once again, that shared responsibility, he brought that up. And actually, I think I was going to skip that slide, but once again, AWS has every certification. I've done ITAR, CMC, NIST 800-53, IRS Pub Sin 75. They got GDPR, CCPA, New York DFR for privacy. AWS and Azure has it. Why do they have all those certifications? They trying to get that state and federal money, so they take care of all of that. So what I got to do is make sure the third party configures them correctly, right? Ooh, that's an excellent question, Chris. For me, meaningful key risk. Once again, those are the big ones, and two, it depends on the industry. In the federal space, once again, that list I put, um, breach notification, what the time is. If they've been breached in the past, how do they handle it? That's a good question. For my side, because I do a lot of federal work, those indicators are just kind of built in when you do STIG questionnaires or CIS questionnaires. A lot of those key risk indicators are built into those questions. Once again, are you using the proper encryption? Are you using the proper hardening? And we looked at the STIGs and the CIS checks. They got high, medium, low, or significant. If you got a critical finding, and it's a finding because you can't configure your hardware, that it shows you your risk off the chart. So that's kind of what I use as my key risk indicators. So I don't really drill down in one when I do those type of questionnaires coming from the STIG or the CIS benchmarks or the schisms. They actually handle that type of, that gets built to show your risk from those. And a lot of times we can build dashboards, and the risk comes if they're critical, moderate, significant, or high, medium, or low. Uh-oh, my slides went away. I don't know if that's good or bad. BW, you take my slide. Oh, appreciate you. It's all good. So here, let me see. I'm gonna wrap it up. I think that's really all I had. I wanted to keep it short. I knew Chris. And once again, shout out to my man David B. So if on-prem, you're responsible for all of this. Infrastructure as a service, right? So you manage in orange, right? Platform as a service. SaaS as a service is not quite right? They're responsible for all of this, but once again, you can still configure it. If you run RDS, you still have 20 things you configure. How you doing encryption? How are you handling cross-site scripting? Are you doing WAF in front of your application? So it's not totally you have no responsibility, because even though it's SaaS in the big cloud vendors, you still have a lot of switches that you control even from a SaaS standpoint. So I'm gonna say that slide's a little off. So there's the SFTP service, some things we would want to do to correct it. Once again, it's really more the SOC and the security architectures, IP whitelisting, PGP encryption and rest in transit. Now, GRC, we'll talk about encryption, rest in transit, and maybe if it's FIPS, but if they're talking about, once again, from AWS, it's got to be private link inside their tenant. Configuring that wouldn't be us. That would actually be the security architects, right? Back to this screen right here. So I think that's really all I had. I just wanted to touch on it a little bit. I didn't want to, and Chris said we might do 2 or 3 of these. So I just want to kind of do the first one. And B-Dub dropped the link. She's always on top of it. Shout out to her. If you want to come in the stage, or you just drop them in there, we can keep going through the questions.